wife, but we went to school together. And she's from Archer, I'm from Hawthorne. Oh. And let me get it right here. November 1938 was the beginning of the history for this family. Born to Uri and Teresa Robertson. He had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. She's the youngest, and she's the only one left here to carry the history on. She graduated from Lincoln Lincoln High School in 1957. After graduating there, she went to college in St. Augustine to Florida Memorial College, which is in Miami, is Florida Memorial University. She got a BS in education, and then she went on to get her master's degree in Master of Science. There's so many things I could say about her, but she's one person that remembers what people tell her. She don't forget anything, and I knew her mother real well because I was there when she passed. And leaving one sibling, I've been there ever since. And we live in Archer, a small town, but the history is in this person. If you want to know anything, even if you see it on Facebook, I just call and ask her. She can tell you, I'll get you in touch with the person you need to know. So at this time, I introduce your speaker, Ms. Liz Robinson Jenkins.
Thank you, John, for that gracious introduction. Okay, good afternoon, family and friends, and welcome to the Mahalda Gussie Brown Carrier story, Images of Rosewood. And Mahalda Gussie Brown Carrier was from Archer too, my mother's sister. And because we had problems as kids pronouncing her name, Mahalda, she said, just call me MG. So when I refer to MG, I'm speaking about my Rosewood aunt, who was a school teacher from 1915 to 1923. My mother was my historian, and she encouraged me, before she passed in 1997, you must keep this history alive. You must give my sister credit. You must include her in Rosewood history because she suffered the agony of defeat, and we cannot let her work go unnoticed or unknown. This is the Florida Black Heritage Trail that was printed in Tallahassee a couple of years ago. I made certain that Rosewood Historical Market is there. In 2000, she was selected one of Florida's great Floridians. It is in another book that I could not find, but I made certain, as my mom said, to keep her history alive. And that is what I am doing. Now, before I talk about Rosewood, I'm going to tell you a little bit about where I came from. I started in 1839 in Parchman, Mississippi. My great-grandmother, however. But she lives in me also. At age 13, 1839, she was taken, kidnapped from her home. Her parents knew that she would be leaving that night, so when the kidnappers came, of course, they were distraught. And this little girl, believed name was Lizzie Polly, because later in life, whenever she told a story, she always referenced Lizzie Polly outsmarting the slave master. Whatever her name was, I think they abused her or beat her to make sure she didn't use it. And she never told them, as long as she lived, what her name really was. And she would also reference the number 19. So they believe that it was her number. I love that lady because she walked from Jackson, Mississippi, the auction block, after leaving Parchman, Mississippi. That's where she was auctioned off. She walked from there to Archer. It took them 6 months. And she was something else, too, to reckon with. 13 innocent and had to fight her way 6 months with other enslaved human beings, okay? But she would tell her children and grandchildren that she fought all the way. She scratched, she kicked, she spat, and she cussed. She didn't curse, she cussed. She knew she couldn't win, but she put up a fight. And some of you all probably can see that fight in me, right, Or? She did. She fought all the way to Archer. However, on the trail, you know, there were gun-toting hired gunmen. And one particular, well, not one, you know what they did? They violated these young girls on the way. So she was impregnated. I don't know the year. I'm sorry about the phone. I don't know the year, but by an Irishman. Okay, his name was Albert Ballman, and it is today on the census, and you can go there and find it. He named her Maria, but he didn't want anything to do with her. However, later in life, and I have this on my Facebook too, right here at the University of Florida, there's a building named for the Bowmans, okay, same spelling. Believed it is part of that slave trade that came from Parchman, Mississippi. It's the Bowman Meditation Center. And you know, many times when African Americans, blacks are involved in history, when it's connected to white America, it goes unnoticed or unmentioned. However, the history is still there. I just wanted to share that because she wanted, the two things that she wanted to do, she wanted to be able to vote and learn to read, and she was denied both. So I vote for her every time I vote, and her granddaughter, my Aunt MG, was the first one in the family to receive a degree for her in her honor. And I understand when she got that degree, it wasn't a degree back then, 1910, it was credentials to teach. So when she received her credentials to teach, she shared them with her grandmother, which is my great-grandmother. Okay, now, that is where I started from on my maternal side. And on my paternal side, started in Cedar Key, which is approximately 9 miles from Ocala. The sound you hear, people are going to my Facebook, okay, and making comments, so I apologize. When in 1885, I located, before my mom died, I said, Mom, what's my granddaddy's name? My daddy's parents' name. I knew it was Ada McIntyre was his mother. Her father was Abner McIntyre, and his father was Henry McIntyre, and I found him in Cedar Key in 1945. Age 1, never was able to put parents with him. I'm still looking, but he was there. He married twice. And he lived outside of Cedar Key. So he was part of Rosewood because Rosewood was known as outside of Cedar Key at one time. So I just wanted to give you a little information on where I started from, okay? Now, Rosewood, approximately founded in 1870. Mary and John Wright, who were the store merchants at the time, had the first house there. And Rosewood started with approximately a few people. It was not all black, as it is believed. It was probably equal black and white. No one has ever been able to tell how many people lived in Rosewood. And that's the first question they asked. But back then, the industry was timber, turpentine, sawmill, hunting, citrus farming, trapping. And the women more or less worked. They were engineers, domestic engineers for the young ladies or for the women that lived in Sumner. And they were midwives, and they did quilting, and they sold quilts to the other, and they knew how to do that. So I know what you are waiting to hear. I just wanted to give you a little history. What you're waiting to hear is what happened January 1, 1923, on a very, very cold morning. It was a young lady by the name of Fannie Taylor, who was the town's slut of Sumner. And I didn't want to say that because my mom always said, do not slander Fannie Coleman Taylor's name. At the time, she never said why. But later, as I researched and kept researching Levy County history, I found out that my great-grandmother, Lucy McIntyre, who was the wife of my great-grandfather, Abner McIntyre, when she married him, her last name was Coleman. And I'm wondering today if they may have been related, because you know, or if you don't know, back then, if you born into slavery, and if you were of light complexion, they put you with a white family to rear. If you were of darker complexion, you were reared by blacks. So I don't know what the situation was, but anyway, Fannie Taylor, and you will hear it later on, was the little old woman with a cheating heart that triggered the Rosewood massacre and the colored had to depart. She was the young lady. She was having an affair with a young man from the hammock. And on this particular morning, by the way, she was married to James Taylor, one son. And James Taylor went to work. He was the foreman at the sawmill. So he went to work every morning at 4 o'clock to get the mill going, and the heat, and that kind of thing. And he would always come back home at 6 o'clock for breakfast. So on this particular morning, her lover, or the man that she was having an affair with, as I said, lived in Otter Creek, and they got into a confrontation. She wanted to call it off, I understand, but he was not ready to call it off. So a fight ensued. She was left black and blue all over. By the time James Taylor got back home to get his breakfast from work, she was black and blue, and he wanted to know, well, what happened? I was raped. I was attacked. And of course, you know what she said, and you know who she accused of attacking her. However, the town went crazy. They believed her. And they called in, James Taylor got a group of men, called in the dogs, and they brought the dogs in from the prison or wherever. And they were going to find this young man who had attacked Fannie Taylor. So the day before, which was December 31st, 1922, here in Gainesville, the KKK held a rally downtown. So they were still in a raw outrage, celebrating the success of their rally And when they were notified, telegraphed to come to Rosewood, that was just something else for them to do. And they did. They came to Rosewood, brought the dogs. So the lover had escaped. And in order to get to Gulf Hammock where he lives, the shortest route was through Rosewood. And of course, that's the route he took. And guess where he went? Straight to my uncle's house. And did he know him very well? No, but the one thing he knew is that Aaron was a Mason. And the Masons kind of, they stuck together. They were not associates, but they honored the sign. So when he got to my aunt's house and uncle's house, he did the Masonic knock. And of course, it was different. They knew it. They knew something was wrong because it was early in the morning. So they both sat up in bed. Aaron, my uncle, if I call him Aaron, he's still my uncle by marriage, put on his clothes, ran through the door, didn't know who it was. What's the matter? What's the matter? My aunt could hear that. But before he said that, he said, who is it? Who is it? She couldn't hear the name, but she could hear him say, what's wrong? Immediately, he came back, put on his clothes, and mumbled something to her that she didn't understand and left the house. But what he did, he went next door to Sam Carter, his first cousin, knocked on Sam's door and said, we've got to help this man. He is in trouble. So we've got to take him to Gulf Hammock. Wrong. Big mistake. So they put him in the wagon and took him to Gulf Hammock to safety. He was safe. He was free. Now they had to come back to Rosewood in the wagon. And when they got back, they saw the crowd gathering because the people in Sumner and in Rosewood had met and decided. They had a meeting place in Sumner around barrels where they would make fire. And they decided that they were going to wait to hear what Polly Wilkerson, who was a deputy, and Andrews, Henry Andrews, Polly was from Trenton, Andrews was from Otter Creek, say, direct them. They didn't wait for the sheriff. They took it upon themselves to get the crowd together. And by the time Sheriff Bob Walker got there, the crowd was in a rage. The dogs were rearing to go. So what did they do? They went, followed the dog trail that took them straight to Aaron's house. But before they got to Aaron's house, I told you that they took the perpetrator, let's call him Sam. No, can't call him Sam because Sam Carter was the one of the violent. Let's call him Jim. They took Jim to Gulf Hammock and came back to Rosewood, and Aaron made sure his wife had gone to Aunt Sarah's house. Aunt Sarah was Sylvester Carrier's mother, and Aunt Sarah was the pillar of the community, and they thought she could resolve all problems. But that's where he took his wife for safekeeping. And they were going to do their own investigation on the outline of Rosewood. And when they got back to Rosewood, after seeing what was going on in Sumner, they knew trouble was ahead of them. Aaron was so afraid when he came back to Aunt Sarah's house, Aunt Sarah Carrier, house, he went to bed. He was so distraught. So, after they didn't find Aaron at home, they went back to Sumner. That's the first mob, and the Gainesville Sun said it was approximately 400 to 500 members. I don't know if they had all gathered there at that time, but they went back to strategize in Sumner. And of course, late afternoon, they came back, went to Aunt Sarah's house because they could not find Aaron at home. There were 3 men they were afraid of that controlled Rosewood: Aaron Carrier, Sylvester Carrier, and Sam Carter. They knew if they would get those people, those 3 men, and all were cousins, out of the way. They could have full control of Rosewood. So, give me a minute. I'm 75. So, they could not find Aaron Carter at his house, so they knew he had to be at Aunt Sarah's house. So that's where they went. Sure enough, they found him in bed. They went in, disrespected the women and the children that were gathering there. Where is he? Found him in bed, pulled him out of bed, put a rope around his neck, tied him behind their car, and dragged him from Rosewood to Sumner, approximately 3 miles. He didn't die. So, when they got him there, the mob of course, was waiting. So they start questioning him about who raped Fannie Taylor. Of course, he didn't know. Okay, he didn't know the man's name. He didn't want to tell. So they beat him with the butt of the gun. That's not why I brought this gun. Okay, they cursed him, they kicked him. And by that time the sheriff had gotten there. So the last time they asked him, well, who raped her? He said something about Sam Carter, but he was going to tell them something about Sam, his cousin. Okay, he was going to tell them, I understand, that he and Sam took the man to Guff Hammock, but when he said Sam Carter, that was enough for them. So they said, well, he's almost dead. Let's finish the nigger off. And the sheriff said, no, I'll finish the nigger off. The sheriff picked Aaron up, put him in his car, and brought him here to Gainesville, and said to Sheriff James Ramsey, who was the sheriff at that time, you got to keep him here, you got to hide him, you can't tell anybody he is here, you got to get a doctor to him. And the sheriff, James Ramsey, said to Sheriff Bob Walker, well, he's almost dead. He said, you get those doctors, Dr. Parker and Dr. Ayers. Dr. Parker is Leslie Cosby's father, and Dr. Ayers is Robert Ayers' father. And get them to nourish him back to health. And you can't tell anybody he's in jail. And Aaron was in jail for 6 months. And they didn't know it in Rosewood, because you know they would have gone there and pulled him out and probably killed him. So the sheriff was kind enough not to tell anybody he was there. So the sheriff knew that there was unrest in Sumner and Rosewood. So as fast as his car could take him back to Rosewood, he went. He went to Aunt Sarah's house, and before he could get out of the car, they came to the door yelling, go, 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 they got Gussie. That was my Aunt MG. They had come to the house, gotten her, put a rope around her neck, put her in the car. They didn't drag her, and took her to Sumner. And they need to get in. Those are my friends. So will somebody open the door? Robert and Derek, just call them. Okay, I'm supposed to be telling my story, aren't I? But they had told me they were coming. They got Gussie. And when the sheriff got there, they had her sitting in a chair where they meet around the barrels, and they were questioning her. What happened? She did not know. What happened? She couldn't answer. What happened? Who raped? Where was your husband? She said, my husband was at home with me in bed. He wasn't. He was. And they kept asking the same question over and over. Where was Aaron the night of the attack? At home with me in bed. And she got kind of sassy, because she was not going to give in to them. and we are going to ask you for the last time, where was your husband last night? She said, you will have to, and had guns to her head, you will have to kill me because my husband was at home with me last night, all night long in bed. She had a premonition. And before they said what they were going to do, she already said, let's rape the bitch. She was ready. She wasn't ready. She expected that. And that's exactly what they did. Put a rope around her neck and took her further into the woods. The sheriff, by the time he got there, it was dark then. And when he got there, he didn't see her, but he somewhat suspected that she was in the area. So he asked, where is she? All mouths closed. Where is she? He escalated his voice. And the mouths closed. And he said one more time, where is she, God D? Where is she? And they pointed in the direction. But she had been there so long, she was almost frozen to death. Because when they took her, she was in bed, had her gown, her nightgown only. And they had ripped it off. But she told my mom that she could hear a voice and she could feel tears that she thought were bugs in her eyes, but she had been crying, and it was frozen ice. So he came back there calling her name, Gussie. She couldn't answer, Gussie. And he kept walking, Gussie. And he saw her because he had a flashlight. She was on the ground. He helped her up, took off his jacket and put around her to keep her warm and helped her to the car. She never forgot that. He had to help straighten her legs out because they were frozen too. And in order to get back to his car, he had to go past those young men. And you know what they called him, don't you? Because he was helping this black lady. Okay. Ian Lover. So he helped her to the car, took her to Aunt Sarah, and there they bathed her and helped her get situated. She was scarred, sticks, stones, and everything else. Her legs was just real in bad shape. That was day one. So they were satisfied. And the sheriff, you know, when he dropped off, he said, take care of her. Day two, they knew they had not found Sam Carter and Sylvester Carrier. And they thought Aaron was dead because the sheriff did tell them I would finish him off. So on day two, they went back to Rosewood after drinking moonshine, feeling good, excited. They were looking for Sam Carter. But before they found Sam Carter, they stumbled up on Uncle James Carrier, who was Aaron Carrier's father and my Aunt MG's father-in-law. You remember I told you they did trapping, animal trapping? So Uncle James were coming from the woods. He had gotten animals from his traps. When they saw him, what are you doing out here? What happened in Sumner? He didn't know what they were talking about because he hadn't even heard it, because he was out all night watching his traps. Uncle James had a stroke. He walked with a limp. And they said to him, if you don't tell us what happened, we're going to kill you, you're going to dig your own grave, and we're going to put you in there. And just like they told him, with his affliction, he had to try to dig his grave. They laughed, okay? And they shot him and put him in the grave. So they were still dissatisfied. Oh, and by the way, they celebrated every time they killed someone. So by the time they finished celebrating the death of Uncle James, someone spotted Sam Carter, who was trying to get to Aunt Sarah's house. So, of course, they captured Sam Carter. They knew who he was. And instantly, they killed him. And after they killed him, riddled his body with gunshots, they hung him in a tree and lynched him. He was already dead. So they celebrated that. They went home, approximately dark by now. They went back to Sumner and they celebrated all night long. So on day 3, they knew they had to find Sylvester Carey. That's 2 down, 1 to go. So they sent message by the sheriff that we are coming to Rosewood to kick and he sent a message back, and you got to bring it to get it. The one thing I can say about those guys, they were not afraid. They resisted. So, Sylvester Carey sent out a message to all of his Levy County friends, his Rosewood friends. And you probably don't know, but some of you know that black folks used to travel the back way because you were too afraid to travel the main highway. How many of you know this? Okay. I remember one day this is sidebar, going to Brunson with my dad from Archer, the back way, and I wondered why. Okay? When I got older, I found out why. But anyway, Sylvester Carey had communicated with his friends and said, y'all come to my mom's house, bring your guns, ammunition, and I understand the store merchant John Wright also shared and gave them ammunition. Don't know this. And be ready, because the mob is coming to Rosewood, to Aunt Sarah's house tonight, to my mom's house, and they're coming to kill us. So what happened, all of his friends came. They hid under the house, behind the house, in the barn. Here's a chair up here, honey. And they waited for the mob. Of course, they were loud because they loved drinking. They were loud. They were heard coming down the road in their Model Ts or T models, whichever. And they waited for them. So they got out talking noise about what they are going to do and what they had come to do. The men never said a mumbling word. The women and children were all in the house with Aunt Sarah, and no, it was not a 2-story house as portrayed in the movie. It was a shotgun house. Big, but it was a shotgun house. So they were trying to keep the kids quiet so the mob would know where people were located in the house. So when Aunt Sarah was walking through the house to quiet the kids, she was shot and killed. And the women in the house went crazy. Oh, Aunt Sarah's been shot. Sylvester, her son, was sitting with 2 guns. He had twins, one on each leg to keep them from making a noise. And I have found everything in my story, in my research, except who those twins were. And he said, shoot, everybody shoot. And that's exactly what everybody did. They started shooting from under the house, around the house. And when you hear the story, there were only 2 whites killed, that's a lie. Okay? There were more than 2 whites killed. You could hear my aunt say, the people on the aisle, oh, I've been hit. Oh, I'm shot. So when they got enough and couldn't take any more, they went home, back to Sumner. But the ones that were dead and dying, do you think they took them? Of course not. They left them because they were met head on with fire. So they said, hey, I better get out of here. So that's what they did, and back to Sumner they went. The next morning, however, the blacks were still hanging around, and guess what they did? They kept shooting and shooting and shooting in the air. Who knows why? To let them know that there was life in Rosewood. And they were like 3 miles away. They could hear the gunshots. Okay, that was to scare them off. And of course, why wasn't the sheriff there? Because the sheriff had been running from Cedar Key, begging the train conductors, 5 or 6 different groups of them, to please put a train on. I need to get these people out of Rosewood alive. And all of them said to him, no, we cannot risk our families. We cannot get them involved. We can't help you, Bob. So when Bob got back to Sumner, 9 miles from Cedar Key, everybody wanted to talk to him then, but when he tried to tell them this was unnecessary, they didn't listen. Everybody wanted to talk to him. We need you to help us, because they gave him the whole story. So the sheriff came to investigate because they had told him how bad it was in Rosewood and how many people they had killed. So when the sheriff got there, he had to walk and step over bodies to get to the house, and he just knew everybody in the house was dead. So when he opened the door and saw these women and children, he almost passed out because he stepped over many of them to get to them. So he said to my auntie Gussie, take them to John Wright's house. John Wright was a store merchant. He is expecting you. Was John Wright expecting them? No. But that's what they did. They went, clothes, very few. They couldn't take anything. But on that day, I forgot to tell you all, on the second day when they killed those other 2 guys, James Carrier and Sam Carter, they also killed Lexi Gordon. And the reason they killed her, because Lexi Gordon had sent her children over to Aunt Sarah's house early on day 2 morning. And she didn't leave her house because she was ill. She was too ill to travel. But when she knew it was really, really serious, she was trying to make a run for it to get to Aunt Sarah's house. And they saw her, and it was a laughable joke. So they shot her and killed her. So that's 4 people dead. Okay, that was day 3. And everybody left in Rosewood went to John Wright's house, and he hid them in the barn, in his grocery store. And there were some that kept walking and kept running, and there were some that hid out in the swampland. Okay? There were some that hid in the swamps. So, eventually, the sheriff, then Sheriff Bob Walker, said, I got these people here, I still got to get them out of Rosewood. So he went back to Cedar Key. He begged everybody, the train conductors, they all said no. So there were 2, the Bryce brothers, Rich from Bryceville, said to him, Bob, we will help you, but it will have to be 4 a.m. in the morning. Why 4 a.m.? Because the people that would have caused problem would be asleep. And there were volunteers, unsung heroes, that volunteered and said, well, Bob, we'll get on the train and we'll go with you so that we can help the old women and the children board the train. And they did. So he came back to Rosewood and he told John Wright, I will be sending the train in the morning, 4 a.m.-ish. So John Wright started planning, and he used my aunt, and he said to her, he and his wife Mary, he said, Mary, Gussie needs a black skirt, a long black skirt. They gave Gussie a lantern. The purpose of the lantern, light the lantern, use the skirt to hide or to camouflage the light when the train is coming. Because at that time, the mob had returned to Rosewood to cover their dead and to bury their dead. That's why they burned down the town of Rosewood. They were burning their dead because they did not want people to know they had lost the battle. So she was scared to death but she could not make any noise because the people that the mob that had come back would have heard her or noticed her, and she was out there by herself. He also told the train, the conductors, flicker your lights, flick the lights when you get close enough to Rosewood. And Gussie is going to show you where to stop using this lantern, not this one, a lantern. And of course, that's what happened. So when she got there, they helped put everybody on the train. And on day 4, early morning, the sheriff slammed the door, highball to the conductor, and the train moved out of Rosewood. Now, all of this information that I am telling you, I shared it with the consultant. Oh, we are going to allow you to be a part of. Got my information. They didn't even put my name in the paper. That's okay, Mama said, I didn't raise no fools. You do your research, you go out and you write your own story. So next, I'm going to be doing a documentary and I'm telling my story. But anyway, that's how it happened. So they left Rosewood on day 4. So a lot happened after that. A lot happened. And I have some things I want to share that's very important. Because I hope each of you are thinking how you're going to help me with this story. If not, think anyway. My mom has said to me, you must write a song, and I'm going to sing that song in a few minutes. She said, I know you can't sing, baby, but sing it anyway. So she helped me write it, and she said, don't attack anybody, don't accuse anybody, and don't make people feel guilty, because this is history. They didn't create it, so you did not create this history, and I didn't. But I enjoy telling the story and keeping it alive, because I was 5 years old when my mom told me the story about Rosewood. Sit on the settee. Mama's going to tell you a story. 4 of us. I'm the youngest, age 5. I was so disappointed with my sisters and brothers. They were not interested. They went to sleep. But they were smart. I wish I had gone to sleep. This story, if you've ever heard the burden of history, it's a burden. And it's on my mind every day. And I'm serious when I say that. As often as I think about my mom, I think about her history. And that's why I tell it, I talk about it, I write it, because I want you to know about it. And if we forget, neither us, and I'm saying it wrong, or our future generation will understand. This is who you are. We are history. And without it, we are absolutely nothing. So, after coming back to Archer, is where my aunt got off the train. The depot is still there. My Uncle William Sam picked her up from the station, took her home. Papa, her dad, over there, was in Mulberry working. But when he heard about that story on the radio or whatever, he was a fireman for the train in Mulberry. He caught the train back to Archer. And Sheriff Bob Walker said, no one is to come down here. I wasn't talking to Charlie Brown. My baby is there. So what Papa did, he got his hat. Now this is his hat. Okay? He put on his hat, his Winchester, his cane, and by the way, this is a sword. Okay? Mounted his horse, that's the horse's contract over there. His watch and watches. He did all of this. His glasses to pass. He went there pretending he was a reporter. And he came to see what happened to the colored school teacher. And that's how he got into their mind. He went to Sumner, found them at the same barrels, started talking. what gave him away, he asked too many direct questions about the colored girl. And they got suspicious. And he knew that. And when they suspected him, and he knew it, he went behind the tree and, he did his whatever. Got on his horse, mounted his horse, and came back, stopped in Otter Creek with the Strongs and watered his horse. And he could always water his horse at anybody's well, because they didn't know if he was black or white. Because as I said, he passed when it was necessary. So he wasn't satisfied. My aunt never told him what happened. But my mom said, you got to continue to research. And I said to Mom, where do I find the information to tell people and make them believe that Aaron was in jail for 6 months? She said, go to the courthouse down in the records. I went to the courthouse, went down to records, and I asked the lady, the receptionist who was at the front, I asked her about the information I needed to prove that Aaron was in jail. And she said to me, somebody there has that information. So when I got there, I said to the young lady who was at the front desk, look, this is what I need. It happened January, first Saturday in January 1922. My auntie's first cousin killed his wife. Jealous rage because she had, or someone had bought her a pair of stockings back then to go to the First Sundays Association. Jealous rage, he shot her in the leg, and of course she died. But anyway, I asked the young lady for the records. She said, oh, I don't have it. I can't find it. We don't have records. So I turned to walk out of the courthouse, and a young lady standing behind her, African-American young lady, she said to me, what are you looking for? And I told her. She said, give me a couple of days. I'll find it for you. And I need your phone number. I don't know if she got fired, but she went over. So in a couple of days, she called me. I have your information, Mrs. Jenkins. The reason that was important, it led us to find Aaron Carrier in the Gainesville jail. And by the way, her name is Cherry Lewis. I bought this plaque for her in 2000, but she didn't show. And the young man she worked for, who was very nice, name is Jim Powell. I also bought him a plaque. And I refused to give it to them because they got to come to my next meeting, next banquet to get it. But they were most helpful, okay? And they helped me with those records. Now, how did I find Aaron? Remember I talked about my little Irish auntie Mariah Bowman? Mm-hmm. The man that killed his wife, my cousin, was her son. So she would get Uncle William Sams, my uncle, that picked up my aunt. And by the way, in 1923, Uncle William was the only taxi driver we had in Archer. So he would make money taking people to Gainesville for 25 cents. So when Aunt Mariah went to the jail on this particular day, she saw this young man in the cell with her son, and she said, boy, what's your name? He said, Bubba. She said, don't you ask me, what's your name? He said, Aaron. She said, okay, you Hans' husband, right? He didn't know who Hans was. So he said, yes, ma'am. That's what my Aunt Mariah called her niece, Aunt MG. So when she went home, she told them, I found Aaron. He's in jail with my son. That's the first time. 6 months later, in July, my aunt had heard that her husband was still alive. So the sheriff later, and I'm cutting a lot of corners, came and said, you all need to get the heck out of Archer as soon as I let you out. They went to Jacksonville and they stayed there until 1939. And she worked for a doctor. I located the doctor, and his children who were babies at the time. So John took me over there. These ladies are in their 80s, and they wanted to know about Gussie. They remember Gussie. And she moved back to Gainesville in 1939-ish, they did, 40-ish. And she wanted to be a principal. The teaching was still in her blood. She had taught me, but that wasn't good enough. So she wanted to be a principal. So she went to Brunson. She needed credentials. She needed somebody to vouch for her, to say that she was a school teacher. So she went to Brunson looking for the sheriff. And sure enough, she found him under a tree near his house. And he thought he had seen a ghost. And he said, "What are you doing here?" She said, "I want to go back to college. I want my principal's degree. And you need to vouch for me." He said, "Go. I'll take care of it." He did. I have her emergency certificate to be a principal. I have a copy of it. Okay? Where did she want the principal to go? Was back to Gulf Hammer. Why Gulf Hammer? 8 miles from Rosewood, approximately 6 or 8 miles. We believe, Mom and myself believe she wanted to go back to Gulf Hammer and teach because the friends that she met and had in Rosewood, some of them probably had escaped through Gulf Hammer. So as I was going through one day her papers, I found rations. You know what rations are? Coupons. They were red, the same as food stamps. She had applied and got some rations. We believe took back to her friends in Gulf Hammer because she was making enough money to support herself. So she worked there for 2 or 3 years. And I'm going to tell you something that you are not going to believe, but everything I tell you, I have supporting evidence. So in 1942, 43-ish, after she became a principal, she taught here at the University of Florida, the first African-American teacher to teach here. Oh, wow, I don't believe that, Liz. Go to the city library downtown and look in the city directory and look for Aaron and Gussie Carroll. They changed their name. And their address is in that city director, 520, and this is not it, West Court Street. And that's the same address that's in that directory, although I knew it was them. What did she teach and where did she teach here? In the basement. Remedial reading to some of the slow white boys. And I don't mean it as a derogatory, but they were remedial reading. Okay? And when she came in dressed as a maid. And she left dressed as a maid. Sheriff Bob Walker knew she was a teacher, and that's how they utilized her. But you do what you have to do when you have to do it. I think I have told you all most of everything that I need to and that you would remember. Oh, by the way, I also, in 2004, I called the governor's office, Jeb Bush, and I said to him or to his staff, look, we need a historic marker in Rosewood. Well, we can't do that. And I said, oh, yes, you can. I had to make 2 or 3 calls, but I didn't have a problem with that. And eventually, they said, okay, Mrs. Jenkins, it will cost you $2,400. I said, okay. So they said, well, who is going to write the script? I said, I will. So I did co-write the script. They called me back and said, we have ordered it. Did we tell you the cost? It's $2,400. Well, we'll pay for it. Is it okay? And that's how that happened. And on May 4th, 2004, 10 years to the date that Governor Lawton Chiles signed the Rosewood Bill 591, Governor Jeb Bush traveled to Rosewood, I introduced him, and he dedicated the historical marker. Thank you, Governor Bush. Some of the families that live there, and I'm finding people every day call me and ask me who they are. I think I'm connected to Rosewood. I said, do your research? I don't know who you are, and I can't help you. When you find out more about yourself, give me a call, and we'll see what we can do. Let me tell you this thing. One thing I didn't like about the movie, it was just sensationalized, and it was Hollywood. But the one thing I really didn't like about the movie, and I'm going to allow for questions. Remember, it opened with John Wright and a young lady in the cloakroom of the closet. And when I was on the Oprah Winfrey Show, that was my first time seeing it, and out of my mouth came, "Oh, that's not true." And I looked around and everybody was looking at me, well, who is that fool? But I was so taken aback when I saw that. That young lady was Mary Hall, who lived in Rosewood. Her husband died, and she was left, they had like 8 kids, and 5 of them were still with her, and she had to bring them out of Rosewood with her. So at that time, those same 5 kids were still alive in 1997. And Wilson Hall, her oldest son, was very upset with the consultant. He had a heart attack within 6 months, and he died. I went to the funeral, which was in Hilliard, and Hilliard is approximately 17 miles further than Briceville, where the Brice boys had a home there. And coming back, I saw this sign say Briceville. I said, when I get back, I'm going to stop. Sure enough, when I got back to Briceville, I stopped. Mom and Pop store was the only store. They just closed it last month too. No blacks. So I asked the gentleman in the store, I said, do you know or have you heard of the Brice brothers? Oh, sure. Their daughter just died, but their grandkids live down the street. So I went, and of course, I knocked on a door, and here comes Clayton. Clayton was the husband to one of the granddaughters, and he said, well, my wife is not here, but Margaret, her sister, lives next door. So I went to her sister's house, big house, and I knocked on the door. Pretty little girl, about 4 years old, opened the door and saw me and slammed the door. And I heard her little footsteps going down the hall. Grandma, Grandma, Grandma. It took Grandma about 5 minutes to get there, and my heart was on palpitating. I said, Lord, what is happening? So her name is Margaret, came to the door, and she said, hi, how can I help you? I said, my name is Lizzie Jenkins, and I'm a Rosewood descendant, and I'm doing research. She reached out and pulled me to her and gave me the biggest hug. Why didn't you come a year ago? My mother just died, and I don't remember a thing she told me about Rosewood. However, she was kind enough to go through her many, many, many photos and say, pick what you want. And like she said, she couldn't remember anything. She had black pictures in there. And who is it? I don't remember. She didn't remember anything, but she shared with me what she had, what her grandmother had collected. And today, we are still friends. I have made so many friends, black and white. I was speaking one night at the Civic Music Center, Media Center, and there was a young lady in the audience that stood to say, and I'm glad I always speak positive about the people. She stood up to say, Mrs. Jenkins? I said, yes. She said, my name is Abby Elsie. Elsie is a town next to Rosewood. And she said, my grand-uncle was John Wright. I said, girl, don't you leave here before you talk to me. And she is now an attorney, and we're friends. Sheriff Bob Walker, daughter was living in Georgia. I talked with her. She put me in touch with her daughter, and we're still friends. She sent me pictures of her grandfather that nobody else in Alachua County or Levy County has. So I've done my homework. I have a lot that I need you all to help me put together, a documentary, a book, all of this needs to be documented. I have so many documents in my computer. None are finished. But I don't mind reaching out and asking for help. But before, and I think those are the most important key points, but before I go, I'm going to sing you that song that my mom taught me. Well, we wrote together. Girl, you missing history. I got to have at least a drink of water. Excuse me, girl. Now, I know the song, but when I start singing, sometimes I forget the song. So let me see if I can find it. I got it. It's called Rosewood, Florida. My mom says, sit down, let's write a song about Rosewood. I say, okay. And it's called Rosewood, Florida, and I'm going to put it to whatever and try to sell some copies. Rosewood, Florida, borders Highway 24, a destroyed town. No blacks live there anymore, where emptiness resides in the silent, sacred breeze. Life there in Rosewood, no more, only nature's moss-hung trees. Rosewood, Florida once was a growing community, linked with chains of love and family unity. Families were linked with wholesome friendship, and each link represented a special kinship. In this productive southern town of Rosewood, oh Lord, hear the families bonded and they understood each other's lives in their unique neighborhood. Lordy, 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 Rosewood used to be real good, till a little old sleazy woman with a cheating heart triggered the Rosewood massacre, and the colored had to depart. They ran for their lives in the middle of the night. They'd heard that a mob was a-coming to start a hideous fight. Run, 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 run for your life, oh Lord. Hide anywhere, just try to survive. Children followed their leaders with fear in their souls and almost froze to death because it was so cold. They were told not to move by the ones in charge, but trying to keep silent was awfully hard. Messages were sent to them by Sheriff Bob Walker. Listen out for John Wright, the designated talker. The Cedar Key train conductors were told to pick up in Rosewood. Standing by the tracks with the lantern, its young school teacher stood, waiting in desperation to carry out the sheriff's plans, rounding up the hidden survivors to board the midnight train. The sheriff and the Sorona worked around the clock, informed the train conductors just when and where to stop, to pick up the men, women, and children who were hiding out, and bring them to Archie, Florida, traveling the same old route. Bob Walker and John Wright took on a daring risk, put the survivors on the train, Lord, and sent them off with a kiss. Notified the Gainesville families to be on the lookout for their kin. Told them the train was a-coming and told them exactly when. William Bryce and John Bryce headed on up the track, dropping off other survivors, not taking the time to look back, counting heads and taking a name, doing what they knew they should, to report to Sheriff Bob Walker back down in Rosewood. And then they went to Waldo Stark, Lord T. Maxville. The train kept chugging along. Baldwin, Callahan, K-Town, Bryceville would soon become their home. The Fanny Taylor lie had ruined their lives, and her story didn't set too well. And deep down within each survivor's heart, they knew that one day they would have a story to tell about Rosewood, Florida, once was a growing community. Oh Lord, until the fighting started in 1923. No one ever thought Rosewood could go down in death. That brought on so much shame and unforgettable distress. Countywide shame, statewide shame, worldwide shame, that brought on so much painful shame. Oh Lord, an unforgettable distress. Thank you. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I have, before I open for questions, I have a couple of announcements that I want to make, or one announcement. On August 16th, we will be hosting our Rosewood Awards and Scholarship Banquet at the Hilton, okay? And before you leave, I have, are there any elected officials in the house? Elected officials. Anybody running for office in the house? And you are?
You know I am. Hi, everybody. I'm John Human. I'm running for Florida House, District 21.
Okay.
Thank you, Lizzie.
You are welcome, John. I knew you were here. And I see our DEC chair, who works very, very hard.
Not as hard as you.
Robert Prather. Would either of you have anything you say? Any questions? Anybody want to ask me a question? I can answer any question you ask me, except how many people were in the room. Okay.
How many what?
Approximately how many citizens were there in the room?
How many people, white and black, do you think were actually killed?
I have absolutely no idea. I know how many blacks were killed. 4 blacks were killed in Rosewood, and 1 in Meredith. That's where my aunt taught first. And the reason he was killed, he was being nosy. He came out to the road. Oh, what's going on? Da 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 da. And he was shot. And his name was not Mingo William. His name was Mitzi William. And his people today live in Raleigh, Florida.
So how many whites do you think were killed though? Do you have any idea?
I have absolutely no idea. And when they said, I've heard people say, oh, there was a mass grave. Lies. No mass grave. Okay. 4 people in Rosewood were killed, all accounted for. But I don't know how many whites, but my aunt said her story was when they came in, when the sheriff came in, he had to step over people to get to inside the door. Okay, and you know how the Indians never win? Okay, when they are fighting the cowboys? This is one of those cowboy stories. Okay, the battle was won by the blacks. That's my story that was told to me. And it's so easy for me to believe because it came from my auntie. Clyde, you have a question? No? Anybody else have a question? Yes.
So when the train was boarded, were men allowed to board or was it just the women and the children?
Men.
Everybody?
Everybody who came, they helped them on. And that's why I can't take, I don't get angry, with the whites because had it not been for many of them, the people would not have gotten out because, you know, it's a peninsula, one way in and one way out. So I don't know who the unsung heroes were, but as I speak and have been speaking for the last 15 years, I have people who will not say it. Whites will not say it in the audience. They get me to the side. You know, my grandfather was over there training, he helped, you know. But they don't want anybody to know it. And if you ask them anything about anything, what happened in Rosewood, everybody will tell you, Fanny Taylor this. I don't want to know about Fanny Taylor. Tell me something else. And we have gone back to Rosewood approximately 3 times and hosted events, returned to Rosewood. And today, when we go, we can hear gunshots. Boom, 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 boom. You know, the entire time, every 10 or 15 minutes. We ignore it. John is always there with me, and we have friends who are on the board that come and help out. And we're not afraid. And there are still a lot of people that are good people. In fact, a couple of weeks, I'm speaking at Cedar Key Historical Society. I go to Rosewood, I go to Cedar Key. I'm not afraid.
So is the property just there? The land that was owned in Rosewood, is it just sitting there?
No, they took it, they confiscated it. And they said a lot for lack of tax. In fact, before then, my great-great-grandfather's property was confiscated. He lived on lot 102, and Harriet Walker, probably related to Sheriff Bob Walker, lived next door on lot 102 and 101. White, single. Okay, they took his property. They called him in. They had guns on the tables. They had paper that he couldn't read, of course. He could not read. And they said, Henry Yaza, don't you want to sell your property? Yaza. What else should he say? With the guns there and his family, he had 2 wives, about 20 kids, Mary and Emma. They said, put your X here. I got the deeds with the X on it. His X. Okay, I found that. So whatever was left in Rosewood, it was taken. And I have a lawyer who is waiting right now, ready to go for it. I just don't have the backing from my family. It is so many McIntyres. Am I right, Tanya? Am I right, Phyllis? Okay, any more McIntyres in the house? These are our great-grandparents' property, but I wouldn't dare, not alone. At this time, it has been absolutely too long. Okay, for me. And they, oh, yes, I will. And then they look at me, Liz, you do it. Anybody else has a question? Yes?
You mentioned recording the song. Is there a book, or are you going to write a book?
I have written a book. In fact, a couple of books.
So then, in the books, so I can buy it.
Oh, no, I want you to get this live. iTunes. I'm working on getting it recorded and putting it on iTunes for real. How much should it cost? That's okay, I'm kidding. Yes.
So, Mr. Jenkins, what about I want to get a sense for who they were looking for, who did they say could make the crowds, because in the movies, there was Jesse Hunter, I believe. Can you speak on it?
Jesse Hunter was just fictitious name. It may have been a prisoner, I've never found it. It's just what they say, okay? They had done wrong, and they had gotten caught. They went to court, and nobody was found guilty. So Jesse Hunter was just, they had to have a reason for attacking a town of people, okay? And any time when other people want your property, what do? Start a riot. Tulsa, Oklahoma, Ocoee, Florida, and just so many Rosewoods all over the place. But we got to keep telling our history. You know why? So that it will not repeat itself. And our kids don't know our history. And they need to know.
Can you buy a copy of that song?
I don't have it. Oh, this? Oh, you can have this. The one I just used? Yeah. Oh, you can have it. Okay. And I know you well enough to know you aren't going to do anything with it, cousin. Yes, you may have this copy. But by the end of March, it should be, I'll let you know. Any more? Yeah, Pat?
For so many years, the blacks would talk about what happened in Rosewood. What do you think? Why do you think that happened? They would keep quiet.
Scared. Because my aunt, I told you, moved to Jacksonville. And on the weekends, she would come to our house, hiding out every time she came home. And they stalked her for all of those years, as long as she lived. She died in 1948 at age 52, born in 1894. They were afraid to talk about it because at night we were sitting in our house, 3-bedroom. You could see through, You all probably don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, lamp light, and Mom and Dad, we would be listening to the radio, Amos and Andy, or Nashville, Tennessee, Ernest Tubb. We would hear a car. We lived at the very end of the road, and if we hear a car coming, or a truck, we knew it was coming to our house. And Dad would blow out the light, oh, I'm sorry, and say, go to bed. And we would run to the room and jump in the bed, not knowing why until we got older. They were stalking our house. And I remember one time, I'm afraid of rats. And we had a barn because we were a farmer, and we had a tobacco barn. Matter of fact, know what I'm talking about. And you do. And we had a barn. So Papa, my granddaddy, was ill, and he was living with us. Dad's boss man, who he sharecropped with, came by and said, well, it's going to be a storm, a hurricane is coming. Y'all need to go to the barn. Sun's shining, but y'all need to go to the barn tonight, okay? We don't know what they had planned. And I said to Dad, because I was always talk a lot. I said, Dad, the sun is shining. There can't be a storm coming. But we went to the barn, and Dad had to carry Papa out there and take blankets. They didn't talk because they were afraid. Just to answer your question.
Many years after, because my grandmother lived to be almost 100, and many years after, they still didn't talk. So,
But
you were afraid, but
yes,
I guess oppression and those kinds of things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because your grandma, Mrs. Roberta, you are Reddick also, aren't you? Signed on my aunt's certificate, marriage certificate. Mm-hmm. Those people knew, they didn't talk. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Have you ever, in any of your speeches, have you ever heard from a descendant of an attacker? Have you ever been approached?
No, they will not. No, to answer your question. Answer that question again. I thought about something when you were asking it. See if I can remember.
Oh, have you ever been approached by a descendant of an attacker?
No. But I had something important to say. I just can't remember. No, I have not. Okay? They are always the good guys. Okay? They know the story they will not tell you. Now, they'll talk. Always about fairy tales. And I know that story. I gave 11 scholarships last year to just to show who I am, to 11 Rosewood scholarships in my aunt's name, to 4 kids from Levy County and 7 from Alachua County. Blacks, Jews, Hispanic, African American, whites. Okay? Go to my website and you can see their name, rosewoodflorida.com, and you can see who I gave them to. So I'm trying to do what needs to be done to make it better. I think you were there, Robert, weren't you? Okay. Yeah, Robert has been hanging in there, so he knows as much about Rosewood as I do. He's very supportive, y'all. Do you have a question? Anybody else? Well, thank you all very, very much for coming. Thank you.